They called him a visionary, a savior of the future. But behind the promises of peace, he was building a prison, one lie at a time. In a world desperate for hope, the people chose illusion over truth, and by the time they realized the cost, freedom was already gone. This is The Illusion of Tomorrow, a story of power, deception, and the downfall of a nation that forgot how to question its leaders.
Thank you for joining me for Storytime with Tanya for this story called The Illusion of Tomorrow. This is part 1, called The Rise of Adrian Vale. The first time Adrian Vale appeared before the masses, he was nothing more than a face among 1,000 glowing screens. Projected 60 feet high above the cracked marble plaza of New Aethel. His hologram shimmered with a faint blue halo against the jagged silhouettes of steel and glass towers. The glass behind him hung, bruised violet and orange, thick with decades of pollution and volcanic ash. His voice, smooth as aged whiskey and commanding as a military drum, carried the precise rhythm of someone who'd been trained not in politics, but in the nuanced art of performance. Vale wasn't yet a statesman. He was an illusionist, a showman who had once dazzled small crowds in underground theaters with elaborate tricks of light and shadow, making coins materialize from thin air and volunteers disappear in puffs of crimson smoke. And yet, that night, tens of millions across 7 territories tuned in, their faces bathed in the gold glow of their screens. "I don't stand before you as a politician," Vale declared, his uncanny green eyes enhanced by retinal implants that caught the dying sunlight like polished malachite, sweeping across the sea of upturned faces. His holographic hand rose, fingers splayed against the bruised sky. "I stand as one of you, a man who has been ignored, overlooked, and silenced by those in ivory towers, but no longer." His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the plaza, intimate as a confession. "The time for renewal is here. The future is ours together." The crowd roared, a primal sound that rattled windows in nearby buildings. Tears streamed down weathered cheeks. Strangers embraced. They believed him with the desperate conviction of the long abandoned. Elias Garrow, however, did not. He sat in his small flat across town, a third-floor walk-up with stains mapping the ceiling like ancient constellations. The broadcast flickered across his weathered face, casting shadows that deepened the lines around his eyes. Eyes that had spent decades squinting at faded manuscripts under the sickly fluorescent lights of New Aethel's university's sub-basement archives. His fingers, permanently stained with the sepia of deteriorating parchment, drummed against the arm of his threadbare chair. He recognized Vale's cadence, the theatrical pauses, the half-truths dressed as promises, the same rhetorical patterns that had preceded the collapse of 2087. His wife, Clara, glanced over from her perch on the sofa's edge, noticing how the muscles in his jaw clenched beneath salt and pepper stubble. "You're reading too much into it," Clara said, leaning forward until the hologram's emerald light caught the silver strands of her otherwise auburn hair. Her eyes, once the deep brown of fertile soil, but now clouded with early cataracts, reflected Vale's towering figure in miniature as she watched his projection with parted lips. He's giving people hope. Isn't that what we need? Elias shook his head slowly, the joints in his neck cracking like kindle. His fingers traced the worn velvet of his chair, feeling each thread with where the fabric had surrendered to time. Hope in the wrong hands is the sharpest weapon of all. It cuts deeper than fear ever could. Vale understood what no other candidate grasped. Facts no longer swayed the people. Emotion did. Data was dismissed as sterile mathematics. The province of elites with their pristine laboratories and ivory tower algorithms, logic was distrusted as a labyrinth designed to confuse the common citizen. People didn't want truth. They wanted the visceral sensation of truth flooding their veins like a narcotic. And so, Vale crafted his campaign as immersive theater. His rallies transformed drab municipal plazas into sensory wonderlands. When he spoke of a broken society, three-dimensional holograms of crumbling bridges with exposed rebar and darkened hospitals where phantasmal patients writhed on gurneys materialized behind him. When he promised safety, augmented skies transitioned from toxic ember to crystalline azure, while glass and graphene cities gleamed like diamond fractals in sunlight, and holographic Carolina parakeets, extinct for 2 centuries, fluttered overhead in iridescent emerald flocks. Reality is what we choose it to be, he told the people, his voice caressing each syllable like a lover. The line was replayed endlessly on wristbands, projected onto cloud formations, tattooed on forearms, becoming not a promise, but a creed etched into the collective consciousness. Investigative journalists published exposés that vanished from feeds within hours. Gray-haired professors with trembling voices raised alarms in half-empty lecture halls. Archivists, like Elias, unearthed court documents showing Vale's 7 bankruptcies, his abandoned investors, the staged performances that ended with audience members missing their wallets. None of it mattered. Why dwell on dusty paperwork? Citizens replied, their eyes reflecting holographic promises, when he's the only one painting tomorrow in colors we can taste. And so, when the election came, Vale swept the polls by 63%, a margin so wide that even the algorithms couldn't hide their surprise. The night of his victory, engineered fireworks split the polluted heavy sky into shards of emerald and gold that rained down chemical sweetness on upturned tongues. The city danced in streets slick with spilled champagne and discarded voter badges, while Elias sat in his darkened apartment, the distant explosions illuminating Clara's hopeful face in strobing flashes as he clutched her papery hand in his ink-stained one, whispering a truth that fell between them like a stone. This will not end well. Vale wasted no time. Within weeks of his inauguration, he unveiled the New Dawn Act. his fingers caressing the gold-embossed leather portfolio as cameras flashed. 300 pages of legislation wrapped in patriotic blue covers and tied with silver ribbons. Its preamble written in flowing calligraphy that promised a harmonious society where every citizen sleeps without fear, works without want, and lives without division. Crowds gathered around public screens in every district square, their faces upturned and illuminated by the glow of Vale's calculated smile, as he described a future so tantalizingly perfect it seemed criminal to question it. But buried deep within its clauses were shackles. Independent media dissolved into the one broadcast network. Biometric citizen IDs tied to compliance scores. Emergency powers with no expiration date. Elias read the bill with a growing dread, his fingers trembling slightly against the crisp government paper. The kitchen's fluorescent light cast harsh shadows across the dense paragraphs of legalese, each clause seeming to tighten like a noose. "This is the end," he whispered to Clara, pushing the thick stack across their worn oak kitchen table where coffee rings stained its surface from happier mornings. She frowned, her brow furrowing into 3 distinct lines, but her eyes lacked the horror he expected. Her fingers traced the embossed seal on the cover page. "It doesn't look that bad, and maybe if it makes things safer?" "It's never just safety," Elias snapped, his professor's voice cutting through the quiet hum of their refrigerator. "It's control." But no one listened. The New Dawn Act passed with a 93% approval rating, the numbers flashing across every screen in the city like a digital pulse of surrender. That night, New Aethel erupted in celebration once more. Crimson and gold fireworks burst against the ink-black sky, their reflections trembling in the glass facades of skyscrapers. Citizens danced in streets slick with spilled champagne, their faces flushed and gleaming with sweat under the harsh glow of surveillance lights. And Vale, hidden in the shadows of his Capitol spire, a needle of obsidian glass piercing the clouds, watched through bulletproof windows, the corner of his thin lip curling upward. His victory was absolute. The first to vanish were the journalists. Mira Chen from the Independent Tribune disappeared 3 days after publishing an analysis of the Act's surveillance provisions. Her apartment was found immaculate, bed made, coffee still warm in its mug. Critics of the regime vanished in the night, branded traitors and conspirators on morning broadcasts that played in endless loops. Families received cream-colored envelopes with official seals and condolences, but never bodies to bury. Next came the teachers. Elias's colleagues thinned like autumn leaves from a dying tree. Professor Whitman, who had taught political theory for 30 years, resigned abruptly, his office emptied overnight. Dr. Laszlo was accused of sedition after a student recorded his lecture on historical parallels to authoritarian regimes. One morning, Elias stood before his university office door, key hovering uselessly before the gleaming new brass lock that had appeared overnight like a metallic tumor. His reflection warped in the polished surface, gray-streaked hair, hollowed cheeks, eyes wide with the realization that had been building for weeks. A custodian shuffled past with his gaze deliberately on the freshly waxed linoleum. A week later, a cream-colored envelope with the university's embossed seal arrived, containing a single sheet of paper with the word terminated, appeared in cold serif font, surrounded by bureaucratic platitudes. That night, Clara's fingers trembled against his sleeve in their dimly lit kitchen, her whisper carrying the scent of mint tea. Please, please, just keep your head down. If you stop speaking out, we'll be safe. But Elias felt the weight of his dog-eared history texts stacked on their shelves. Pages marked with yellow notes where patterns emerged across centuries, and new silence was its own form of death. Years blurred into a smear of identical days. New Aethel transformed beneath steel and glass, its once vibrant neighborhoods now uniform in their sterility. Quadcopter drones with glossy black camera eyes hovered at every intersection, their rotors emitting a mosquito-like whine as they scanned faces for compliance scores that flashed on citizens' wristbands. The gray marble library, where Elias had once lost himself among paper and leather, was gutted, its arched windows now illuminating rows of identical gray tablets, each loaded with text where paragraphs would silently change overnight. In school classrooms, children recited new history lessons that traced Vale's lineage to founding fathers. His portrait, stern yet benevolent, watched over them from frames rimmed with gold leaf. At markets, people clutched ration cards with trembling fingers, the weekly allotment of protein cubes and vitamin paste shrinking while nightly broadcasts showed computer-generated footage of foreign saboteurs poisoning croplands. Citizens wore their hunger like badges of honor, pinning government-issued sacrifice for strength medallions to their threadbare coats. And still, Vale's approval rating climbed into 97%. The number projected onto the Capitol spire every evening at sunset, glowing red against the darkening sky. Elias hosted secret gatherings in his basement, where a single bulb dangled from exposed wire, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. 7 folding chairs arranged in a tight circle, voices never rising above a whisper as he passed dog-eared books with blacked-out government seals. But the fear was constant. A metallic taste on the tongue, a prickle at the nape of the neck. Every creak from the floorboards above made hearts stutter. Every meeting felt like a coin toss of fate. Clara, once hopeful, grew quiet, withdrawn. The dimple in her left cheek that appeared when she laughed hadn't been seen in months. She no longer spoke of politics, busying her trembling hands with mending clothes that weren't torn. She no longer smiled when Elias whispered warnings, her eyes fixed instead on the dust motes floating in the thin shafts of the evening light. She focused only on surviving. One evening, as drones hummed past their window, their red scanning beams slicing through the gap in their threadbare curtains, she whispered the words that cut Elias deeper than any state decree. Maybe you were right, but it doesn't matter now. It's too late now. 5 years later, Vale revealed his final card. Project Everlight glowed on massive holographic displays through New Aethel. the golden logo pulsing like a heartbeat above pristine white renderings of smiling, ageless avatars. The neural network promised to preserve every citizen's consciousness in a digital utopia. Crystal lakes that never dried, gardens that bloomed eternal, and skies unmarred by the industrial haze that choked the real world. No more death, no more suffering, eternal peace. So long as one pledged loyalty to Vale with a thumbprint on the dotted line. To enter this paradise, citizens had to surrender everything: the deeds to their cramped apartments, the autonomy to choose their own paths, even the right to disconnect. Their physical bodies would be maintained by the state in vast warehouses of nutrient tanks, monitored by silent drones, until what Vale called the transition was complete. Millions volunteered, forming twisted queues that wrapped around city blocks like desperate human rivers. Those who hesitated found their faces projected on the loyalty monitors, branded in pulsing red as enemies of progress. Elias watched from the shadows of a crumbling apartment complex as hovering silver convoys, embossed with Vale's golden insignia, ferried wide-eyed citizens to gleaming white upload centers. Their faces glowed with an almost religious fervor beneath the harsh blue lights. Within weeks, the metropolis hollowed. Market squares where spice sellers once haggled and children played among scattered fruit rinds became wind-tunneled wastelands. Only the mechanical whir of obsidian drones punctuated the sulfuric silence. When Clara packed her meager belongings into a transparent regulation bag, Elias clutched her wrist, feeling bone beneath paper-thin skin. "It's another lie," he pleaded, voice cracking. "They'll own you, body and soul, just meat in their vats." She looked at him with bloodshot eyes, irises dulled by years of industrial smog and disappointment. Eli, I don't care anymore. I'm so tired of being afraid. If it's a lie..." Her chapped lips formed a brittle smile. "At least it will be a peaceful one." She went, and Elias never saw her again. Years passed like rust creeping across abandoned machinery. New Aethel became a hollow city of steel and silence. Its once bustling avenues now wind tunnels where only dust and memory circulated. Chrome-plated drones with ruby sensor arrays patrolled abandoned streets, their rotors slicing through fog thick with industrial particles. Glass and titanium towers loomed empty, their darkened windows like countless blind eyes staring into nothingness. Food rations, synthetic protein cubes in diminishing shades of gray, dwindled with each distribution cycle. Yet, the broadcast still played on cracked screens throughout the city. Vale's azure hologram flickering but never fading, his perfect teeth gleaming as he preached hope from every functional display. Rumors spread through the remaining population that Vale himself had long since uploaded, existing only as immortal code in his own false paradise, his physical form discarded like an outgrown shell. But to the people, those who remained huddled in the shadows of his empire, he was still savior, eternal, untouchable. Elias now stooped beneath a shock of brittle white hair. His once steady hands, mottled with liver spots, gathered the 7 remaining free thinkers in the damp concrete bunker beneath the abandoned library. By the guttering light of a tallow candle, real wax, not the synthetic illumination that bathed the upload centers, he whispered truths that had been systematically erased from the city's collective memory. "I tried to warn you," he said, his voice fracturing like thin ice, eyes watery behind cracked spectacles, lenses held together with copper wire. "I tried to warn all of you, but you didn't want truth. You wanted dreams, and dreams." He paused, transfixed by the trembling orange flames that cast grotesque, dancing shadows across the walls, peeling propaganda posters. "Are the easiest chains of all." He died nameless in a puddle of muddy water, his final breath rattling like lungs scarred by industrial particles, his warnings lost in the crackling static of the one broadcast ceaseless propaganda. And Adrian Vale, liar with a silver tongue, illusionist of digital dreams, tyrant behind a benevolent smile, was remembered not as the thief who stole humanity's freedom, but as the architect of an immortal paradise. His chiseled face etched into obsidian monuments that gleamed wetly in the acid rain, his honeyed words carved into polished marble stones that lined every remaining public square. His meticulously crafted lies eternal as the artificial consciousness he provided. Sometimes, when the toxic wind swept through the hollow titanium and glass towers of New Aethel, it carried whispers from the past, faint echoes of voices silenced long ago, trapped between dimensions, their digital screams muffled by the hum of massive server banks. We chose wrong, and we will suffer forever for it in our nutrient tanks, minds imprisoned in a false paradise. The end. Thank you for joining me for part 3 of The Illusion of Tomorrow. I hope you enjoyed the story, and stay tuned for more coming soon.